I'm not going to give you a lot of backstory. Let me give you the quick overview of how it happened. There had been some mischief around the neighborhood at night, and the night before I had heard some loud scratching on the vinyl siding of the house. That's it. That's the beginning of my story. Now, it was a day later, 2 hours after midnight actually. I tried to fall asleep, I really did, but I ended up staring at the ceiling. Scratching hadn't come yet, and I still didn't feel relaxed enough to go to sleep. So instead of wasting time, I get my shotgun, wrap my bathrobe around myself, and make my way downstairs. I thought that I could, at least, get some work done if I couldn't sleep. But as soon as I entered the kitchen, though, well, shit, my plans changed. I peered out the tiny window, and I saw it there. Now, I didn't know exactly what I saw. I didn't know if I could believe my eyes. The thing had to be 6 or, hell, even 7 feet tall. It looked like a giant version of a daddy longleg, with a human face and limbs that looked straight out of a nightmare. It lasted only for a second, but the creature's face was burnt behind my eyelids. There was a split in the middle of its face, separating 2 dark beads that glowed white in the center. Its maw was also split into 2 parts. The corners of its mouth twisted in the ugliest smile I'd ever seen. Around his head floated stringy gray hair that barely looked attached to its skull. Its body was just as grotesque, consisting of a rotting mass of grayed muscles and spine. The bones jutted out randomly, adding an even creepier feel to the absurd body. Its limbs, now that I remember them more clearly, looked like a hybrid between tree branches and bones. I blinked once, twice, trying to rid of the image, but it wouldn't ever leave me. I knew at this moment that I couldn't let this thing around my house any longer. If it was scratching, it was probably trying to find a way inside. I had to do something to protect my boy. I looked back at the window and saw that thing twist its head at least 90 degrees to stare right back at me. I felt the hair on my nape stand on end as it ran up to my window, planted its face in the window to stare at me up close. I could see part of its grayed skin detaching from its bone as if rotting away. Its mouth was full of rotting human teeth, some almost black because decay had destroyed all the enamel. It stared at me for a few seconds, twisted its head at an impossible angle for a human, then ran away. Well, I didn't even think twice about what I had to do. Saying all that, though, that didn't mean I wasn't scared out of my wits. I got my shotgun, a flashlight, and my keys, then ran out of the house in nothing but my bathrobe and the closest pair of boots I had. I locked the door, making sure that the outside stayed outside. My boy was sleeping, but he was also 13 years old. He could take care of himself long enough for me to take care of that creature. Now it's almost 3 a.m. by now. I'm in my bathrobe with water boots that go midway to my calf, and I'm running after a monster. And part of me wished I was tangled in the bedsheets and having a nightmare. But the freshness of the air biting into my skin was a great reminder that it was not, in fact, a product of my imagination. In the backyard, there wasn't 1,001 places where that thing could hide. There were a couple of trees, and no doubt its mangled branch-like limbs would fit like a glove, but the rest of its carcass could easily be seen. I might not have night vision, but even without the flashlight, I had an inkling this thing didn't come from my backyard tree line. I could even see my neighbor's backyard through it. It wasn't dense enough to hide something like that during the daytime. I live in a small town, but not small enough that I didn't have any neighbors, and not in a secluded enough area that if I screamed, no one would hear it. So I braced myself. I lift my shotgun and walk slowly through my backyard. Now my heart is going wild in my chest. Its incessant, increasing beat reverberating against my ribcage. It shakes my bones and makes me all too aware of the danger. Hell, my every sense is on high alert. I can even taste blood in the air. And it wasn't my imagination. At about 10 feet ahead of me, there's something laying down. And as I get closer, I realize it's the fresh remains of a deer. At least, I assume it's a deer. The poor thing had been decapitated, and most of its body had been torn to shreds. Most of its flesh was gone. The only reason I knew it was a deer was because of the pieces of brownish fur around, the shape and size of the rib cage, and because my son and I sometimes fed stray deers that came up to our backyard. Well, I swallowed thick as I realized all of its organs were missing, and all that remained were bones that had been nearly polished clean of muscle and blood. Whatever that creature was, it ate meat, and liked the taste of blood enough to even clean bones. It didn't seem to like fur all that much, though, considering the poor deer's coat had been torn and discarded, most likely judged useless by the monster. My palms became moist as I tightened my grip on my shotgun. Despite cleaning the deer bones, that monster was a messy eater. There was a trail of dark splotches going from the carcass to God knows where. I could only assume those dark spots were blood that dripped from its split maw. And at that moment, I was glad I wasn't sensitive to carnage, and took mental note to dispose of the deer carcass before sunrise. The last thing I want is for my son to wake up to this sight. But for now, though, I had more pressing matters to attend to, like finding wherever the hell that beast had gone off. I used my flashlight and followed the bloody patches of grass. After walking for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, the dark spots stopped. Considering the thing walked on twig-like limbs, there was no steps to follow either. The grass looked as undisturbed as it would in a horseless field, but I couldn't give up. Hell, I could feel my throat drying up as I thought what would happen to my son if he stumbled upon that creature. I hadn't even been able to locate the head. It was gone. And flashing around hadn't revealed even a piece of ear. It probably meant it was eaten. The split in that monster's face was probably meant to part it in two, allowing it to eat something as big as a deer head in one bite. Now, I don't know though. Maybe I'd played too many video games with my son and my imagination was running wild. But it's not like I had any experience with monsters outside the realm of fiction. But I pushed forward, hoping to spot more blood on the grass ahead. My eyes were moving left and right at frantic speed, scanning the horizon before me in hopes of seeing it. I took a deep breath and exhaled shakily, the sounds of crickets around me only making me more anxious. Everything around here was far too quiet. Far too quiet despite the gruesome scene of death that lied behind me. And then as I was walking, my foot hit something solid, and I stared down at the ground. For a second, I didn't see it. I used my flashlight, and it still took me a few seconds to make out what I was seeing. I tapped my foot down again. Thump, and the floor resonated. Beneath my feet was grass, but underneath the grass there was something else. I could finally make out the split in the middle, and so I knelt down and dug. I didn't have to dig much, because the grass was easy to remove. Its root system wasn't too deep, and I realized that the reason the grass was caving in that spot was because there was a door underneath it. A trapdoor. Now, I couldn't remember ever seeing it before. It was in the furthest end of my backyard, somewhere even I didn't go with my lawnmower. The grass around was a lot longer than the rest of my yard, which is probably why I'd never noticed the trapdoor before, but it was so small. I mean, I was small enough to fit into it, but the creature I'd seen, unless it could somehow wrap its limbs around its frame to go down, I couldn't see how it could fit in. But still, now I opened that trapdoor, and the stench of stale air, putrefaction, and death followed. It was so strong my stomach twisted in a knot, and my heart rose in my throat. I managed to keep it all in. There was no doubt now as to what this place was. It had to be the beast's lair. I knew it couldn't have thrived in the small line of trees behind my house, so it had to come from underground. It would explain the grayed skin that never saw the sun, the darkness of its pupils. It was a creature that came from the night and hid itself underground in the day. My tongue was dry as I tried to wet my parched lips, and somehow I didn't realize I'd been panting my whole way over there. I was terrified. But again, the image of my son's bloody carcass in my backyard was incentive enough for me to go down the rabbit hole. It was tight. I made it in without a problem. It was a chance I'd lost that extra 40 I'd put on in the past few years after my divorce. If this had happened right after Mary left, I couldn't have gone down so easy. As my feet hit the ground, I felt a bead of sweat on my eyebrow. I wiped it quickly, and a series of clicks echoed from the back of this underground tunnel, which hadn't been carved by human hands. It looked like a wormhole, circular, big enough to accommodate the beast's height and size, but not any bigger. I would have expected the smell of earth to be stronger, but the rank smell of decay easily surpassed that one. Whatever the creature was, it had a ferocious appetite. I started walking, still holding my shotgun tight to my chest. Another series of clicks echoed from the far end of the tunnel, and my heart felt about ready to leap out of it. And my heartbeat was so intense I could hear it thump against my eardrums, drowning any other sound there might have been underground. And as I kept advancing, I felt my boots sinking a little more with each step, a sensation that wasn't unlike the one you would feel walking in mud. I turned my flashlight to the ground and realized that the soil beneath my feet was wet, but there wasn't any water down below. I took another step forward and felt something breaking under my weight. And I wish I could tell you it was a tree root or a branch, but when I looked down, I saw the remnants of a very small skull. It had to be of a small animal, maybe a rabbit or a mole or, I don't know, something else entirely. But I held my breath and took another step forward. And an inhuman screech echoed throughout the entire tunnel. My blood turned to liquid ice and I stopped dead in my tracks. The screech lasted a whole minute, in which I felt like something was tearing at my very soul. I could feel it claw at my core, leaving me feeling as bare as the day I was born. I was exposed and I was in danger. My hand shook as I lifted the flashlight to see ahead of me, but all I could see was the gore left behind by that creature. Various animals of all sizes had been dragged down this hole, head cleanly shaven off, their necks and bones picked clean. I was walking in blood-soaked soil, chasing a creature that had a higher kill streak than a loose farm cat with barn mice. I didn't even know how long that tunnel was, and if something happened to me, nobody would find me down there. My only advantage on the beast was that I was sentient enough to not underestimate it. unlike the animals that were now corpse decorations to this underground abode. Each step I took forward was more stressful and painful than the other. The weight on my shoulders and chest was crushing me, and I surprised myself thinking I should go back. I could just warn my son to never go out of the house again. I could move and leave everything behind. I didn't have to go that far to ensure my kid's safety. I stepped on a pile of bones on drier soil and felt that a rib cage cracked and break under my weight. It was about the size of a cat or maybe even a small dog. I held my breath again and whimpered internally. If anything, the last thing I wanted was to announce my arrival to this beast. For now, I was only seeing animal corpses around, which I tried to take it as a reassurance that it did not feed on humans. However, even if it didn't feed on humans, it could still very well kill me, or worse, my son. I looked back behind me, uncomfortable with the distance I put between myself and the only exit. My head was also becoming dizzy. The stench of death was making me nauseous, and my narrowed vision following the light of my flashlight was hard on my eyes. I swallowed thickly, even though there was no saliva left in my mouth. My lips were chapped and my skin was covered in sweat, which made the underground feel even colder than it should have. I still held on to my shotgun and advanced. And then another dreadful series of clicks echoed throughout the tunnel, as if warning me to turn around. It was a lot closer this time, and so I guess the end of the tunnel was nigh, and the creature was trying to ward me off. It feared me. It feared my ability to think and carry a weapon. I was a menace, and I tried to comfort myself with that, but honestly, my heart was on my lips, and I was a noise away from losing 5 pounds of stress through my asshole. I flashed ahead of me, ignoring the cracking sounds as I stepped into a floor that was more bones than it was soil. I was getting close to its feeding area. I could smell it, but the incessant crunching under my feet couldn't lie. This creature had been here for a while, or it had a monstrous appetite, considering the amount of bones I was stepping on. At least I wasn't walking in mud anymore, but the fact I was walking on bones didn't make me feel any better. The ground was solid, but my spine was getting quite gooey, my resolve waning. And I started hearing it breathe, like a man dying of lung cancer. Its breathing was a high-pitched wheeze, and I could smell its breath from where I stood. It was nothing short of rancid. I could smell the bouts of flesh rotting between its decaying teeth, and it made me sick to my stomach. The creature finally turned from its hiding spot and revealed its face to me again. Without the window, I could see it clearer than day. I saw every crack and crevice on its face, the dryness of its skin creating a stark contrast with that wet tongue as it slid across its lips and stared at me. Its smile stretched and I felt like I was rooted in my spot, fear gnawing at my guts. I couldn't hear it breathe because the sound of my own heart was deafening. I lifted my shotgun as its slimy tongue clicked to the roof of its mouth. I took my aim and shot. Once. Twice. Its screech nearly forced me to my knees because of the sheer intensity. I tried to reload and aim again at the beast, but in my panic and because of the wetness of my palms, I dropped my shotgun. And it noticed this because it took a swing at me. And it's at this moment I realized I must have blinded it. It was at this moment that I realized I must have blinded it. I must have had one lucky shot that ate through half of its skull and burned the upper half of its face. Its long limbs slashed at me and I felt my robe tear and blood well up to the surface. Instantly, the wounds felt like they were burning. I abandoned my shotgun, stood up, and ran as fast as I could. As I reached the muddy area, my boots got stuck and I fell face first into the mess of soil and blood. Some even got into my mouth. I can't even describe to you the taste. I heard the monster running after me, slashing away at the tunnel in its wake. I heard the sound of sand and soil falling and felt terrified that I might end up being slashed to death or, hell, even buried alive in it. I raised myself and ran until I felt my legs burning, and then climbed out of the hole as fast as my legs and arms permitted. Once I was out, I heard another screech and slammed the trap door shut. There was blood all over me, running down my front and sides, but the adrenaline pumping through my system kept me going. I needed to seal that passage. I saw a huge rock on my left and pushed it with all my might until it was right over that trap door, and I could hear the creature struggle as it scratched at the door, only to be met by the rock. I ran toward my house, got my keys out of my bathrobe, and locked myself in. Ran to the kitchen where I cleaned my wounds in the sink, eyes still fixated on that corner of my backyard, just expecting it to dig itself out and claim revenge. I spent the rest of the night in that kitchen window, cleaning and patching myself up. Hell, jumping at every tiny noise. The next morning, when my son woke up and saw me patched up, I told him we were selling the house and spending the rest of the week at my brother's place. We never set foot back in that house, and I never answered my son's question about how I got those wounds. I just hope to hell whoever buys it never removes that rock.